Hey, Eddie, great to see ya.
Hey, yeah, I've been working a lot at night. I kind of feel like a vampire sometimes.
Don't say that word. Don't. No, the one you've been feeling like. Don't say it. He could.
What word? A vampire?
Die, monster! You don't belong in this world.
Oh, here we go.
Was not by my hand that I was once again given flesh. I was brought here by humans who wish to pay me tribute.
Die, monster!
And he's getting into it too.
You don't belong
well, I guess by
in this
majority
world.
rules that makes it a Castlevania episode then. Not that I mind. It's an influential series with legendary soundtracks. Michiru Yamane and others paved the way for some of the most noteworthy pieces of video game music and all that. It just... some might get a little passionate about it. Oh well, maybe property damage, but it's still Music Arcade.
But enough talk. Have a joke.
Hello everyone, welcome to a very special first of our Halloween episodes of Music Arcade, where we are talking, well, we're talking vampires and vampire killers and whips and just some spectacular heckin' music.
Oh yeah, some legendary music. I am Ranakel, by the way.
I'm Galen, the SoundGuy Firestone, and welcome back, Eddie.
Yes, and I actually like garlic. Thank you very much.
Same. Very same.
Yeah, and me free.
Anyway, we've been plotting and planning this episode for a very long time, and actually getting it to air has been actually more of a challenge than it should have been. But we're finally here, so let's talk about it.
Yeah, and it's basically an episode like we have to talk about it at some point. We've talked about some of the tracks from the series before, and yeah, when we think video game and video game music and things that marked the ages and the eras, the two main topics are the more disconnected Final Fantasy or the more unified and self-referential Castlevania. So let's begin, not by the beginning, because beginning actually started with Castlevania 3. What started in Castlevania 1, however, was Vampire Killer.
I mean, yeah, this is obviously one of the most iconic themes kind of in all of video game music. It's hard for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's if you'll allow me a little tangent right away.
May as well start off strong. Not enough after last episode, huh?
There's these kind of Magic the Gathering cards that are special because the name of the card corresponds to the type of the card. For instance, Skeleton Archers are type card Skeleton Archers. Here it's got that same self-referential vibe. Name, Vampire Killer. Occupation, Vampire Killer. Title theme, Vampire Killer.
Pretty much.
It says it all.
I mean, why reinvent the wheel, right?
Yeah, sometimes just want to hit the nail right on the head. There's a time and place for subtlety. This isn't one of them.
And that isn't one of them. It's like this game and this series has its roots deep in horror imagery, but what's abundantly clear from the start with tracks such as these is that you're not there to be scared of the night and everything. You're here to punch the horrors in the face.
Yeah.
This is not Lovecraft. This is you going through the countryside and a complicated castle to punch a vampire in the face. Or
Yep.
well, whip it.
Or whip it,
You're basically looking at the protagonist from the actual Dracula novel going, weaklings.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah, this series obviously takes a lot of cues from more campy horror, like the original Universal horror. In fact, several Universal horror monsters show up in one way or another as bosses in the Castlevania series.
Yeah, there's that spooky gallery of the mummy, Medusa, the
Frankenstein's
giant
monster.
Pretty much all of them appear in some way or another, though the Invisible Man is not a boss, just a regular enemy. But
yeah,
I think all of them appear.
Yeah.
And that kind of is its selling point, in a way, because it's, again, as you said, it's not there to make you scared, it's there to make you smile, although, admittedly, the jump physics are incredibly scary.
Yeah, the scariest enemy in all of Castlevania is gravity.
Gravity and stairs.
I don't want to know how the laws of physics work in that world.
Very carefully.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that music does not encourage you being careful at all.
No, it doesn't. Speedruns of this game always kind of mystify me because it's like, how do you control the uncontrollable?
So much.
But we were talking about setting the scene, and, you know, if anything does, it's Vampire Killer. Like,
exactly.
Yeah, and it's, again, it's not like we're short of any, like, really emblematic themes. Obviously, you have other huge ones, like, of course, Bloody Tears, one of the other big two, I would say. And sure enough, Bloody Tears has no shortage of, you know, remixes and remasters, and,
yeah,
so,
it's one of the most emblematic, and even more than that, one of the most inspiring and prolific pieces of video game music. Maybe the most.
And I believe it's also the only piece of music from the entire franchise that was used in the anime.
Yeah.
I have yet to watch the anime, which is something I still need to correct at some point, but yeah, that's a bit of a shame, considering, to be perfectly honest with you. I mean, well, I'm glad something got used, but at the same time,
it is used very well.
Yeah,
I'll say that much.
Yes, and it's still one piece of music used more than Sonic, whose films are excellent, hilarious. Jim Carrey as Robotnik is great, but I can't believe they have no Sonic music in those.
Oh, and Sonic is well known for its soundtracks.
Very good music too, though not as emblematic as Castlevania, which is mostly about how important that series music is. Vampire Killer probably at the spearhead. Bloody Tears probably at the spearhead.
Understandably, and so, this is going to sound like a tangent, but we're coming back around to it. Eddie, once upon a time, you were the guy who introduced me to an Italian artist, I believe, who manages to mix metal and video game music and chiptune by the name of Master Boot Record.
Also known as Mr. Victor Love.
Love that that's the translation of that guy's real name.
I think he actually seems to go by that name too.
Yeah.
Because that's how he's credited on Encyclopedia Metallum.
Yeah, but his actual name is that, but Italian.
Vittorio d'Amore.
Exactly. Wow. Lucky man with a name like that. And I, not Victor, love his music.
Oh yeah, no, that's really strong of you to say, Galen Firestone.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Let's be honest here. Master Boot Record kind of could do no wrong. This goes hard and does not mess around.
Yeah, that's a very apt description. They go really hard with those gritty chip tunes and use them to great effect to make it seem both entertaining, harmonious, and like your Amiga computer is dying.
Yeah.
That dude is probably one of very few artists where there isn't a single track I dislike from him.
Yeah.
And this is definitely not an exception.
Yeah. Mild tangent, but we've kind of been poking at the idea of a point-and-click episode, and I've been waiting for someone to hit the button on that so I can go out and buy Virtuaverse, a game that Master Boot Record did the soundtrack for, just so I can gush about it for a while.
Strong argument.
So, the fact that this guy has done a number of game remixes as well, including this one, is pretty good. He's also got one of my favorite versions of Ken's theme from Street Fighter, which is,
yeah, it's great as well.
It's great.
And those Super NES guitar sounds lend themselves very well to his style.
It does. He's got a very unique guitar pad going on, and it works really well. Especially for a song like this one, where you wouldn't think so?
Yeah, and since we're talking Castlevania, I just want to point out, those who end up enjoying the track we have on the playlist, do check out his other project, Kijin Church, which I remember describing to Galen once, to which he agreed, that Kijin Church should be the soundtrack to the Doom mod that transformed the game into a 3D Castlevania.
Which actually exists, by the way.
Yes.
Yep.
I think one of the reasons that track is so inspiring is how universal it feels. It has this amazing hook that sets up the gothic horror themes, and then it goes full on energetic. It's a fight of cool enemies versus cool heroes, duking it out, and there's something kind of fundamental about that. Kind of like one of the base foundations of what video game mythology is.
Right.
And a bit annoyingly, all of that iconicism, let's say, is also present in Symphony of the Night, though almost no one knows about it.
Because I know that soundtrack pretty well, and I don't recall that song showing up.
Yeah, here's why. That track only appears, number one, in the Sega Saturn version.
I knew it.
There it is.
Number two, the Sega Saturn version is Japan only. And number three, it's the boss theme to one specific boss from the one new area present in the Saturn version. And that boss fight is apparently very easy, so you will usually not hear the entire version of the song.
Yeah, which is a shame because, I mean, the song is always good, but the guitar appears a bit in pain, but that's the limitations of the hardware.
Yeah, I actually didn't like this remix that much. Yeah. It's okay, but the piano line's really cool, but I agree, the main guitar is just not really there on it.
Yes. But it's the version with a playable Maria.
Yeah. Didn't they re-add her in the PSP version later? Is that confirmed? I don't know. I've never played that one.
I think so. No, I believe that was for something like Bloodlines. The re-release and remake calendar of Castlevania is complicated, to say the least.
Boy howdy.
I know she's playable in Portrait of Ruin as a partner to Richter.
Yeah, no, I'm specifically talking about the Rondo of Blood and Symphony duo game on the PSP. I thought they re-added her campaign.
Possible.
Maybe,
but I haven't played that version.
Same. Okay, so we might be talking out of our asses right now, and if so, I apologize, and that's my fault entirely. Anyway, moving on to the actual song again. It's fine. It's an okay remix, but compared to MBR's or compared to, of all things, the Pachislot version, and you're the one who turned us on to this one, Rana. I don't think it goes as strong as others.
Another version I haven't played for very understandable reasons.
Same.
I basically pushed other versions of Bloody Tears because I wanted to talk about this version because it's annoyingly my favorite main game version of the theme.
I don't blame you.
I both utterly love and utterly despise this.
Yeah, it goes so hard for a cash grab.
Yeah, the song is unreal. Great. The reason behind it is disgusting.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like playing slots machine while listening to Master Boot record.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's barely more contained than that, and that's saying something. It goes so hard. I guess one of the reasons is that it doesn't really have to care about pacing besides how hard can you mash the give more money button.
And then there's this new harmony line that's really good, and a piano solo in there, and it's just incredibly epic all around. Like, what the hell is this song? Put it in a real game.
Yeah, and the rest of the soundtrack is also incredibly good. I thought I came basically in this research arc with the thesis that the definitive version of most Castlevania themes that are iconic throughout the ages is the Castlevania Judgment one, and we will have some Castlevania Judgment track after that. But no, there's a new challenger, and it's there to drain your wallet if you are a 30-year-old chain-smoking Japanese salaryman.
Thanks, Modern Day Konami.
Yes, loving Castlevania is having to reckon with the pain of what its company is these days.
Yeah.
It does not belong in this world, like the intro said.
Correct. I think life would be better off if Konami just imploded and its licensing went elsewhere.
Correct. Like a sort of evil antagonist scattering its, let's say, 5 relics to different corners of a game map. Wait, no, that's the plot of Castlevania 2.
It's also half of the plot of Castlevania Symphony of the Night. If we're talking about the inverse.
Yeah,
castles.
because it referenced Castlevania 2.
Fair enough, but I played more Symphony than 2, so that's the one I think about.
That's also the plot of Harmony of Dissonance, because it also references. Actually, it references Symphony of the Night, which references Castlevania 2.
It goes in circles, is what we're saying.
Yeah. And that's not even counting the Circle of the Moon. But I think we are, all jokes aside, to an important point is that this music, some of these themes, Bloody Tears first and foremost, settled themselves in our psyche, in the landscape of video game, in large part, I believe, because that series pays homage to itself and references itself so much, which means you can adjust the angle of this or that track until you reach a point that's relevant to what the successive hardwares can bring. And,
right.
Basically, it provides some sort of continuous self-fan service.
Which has its ups and downs, but I mean, FF14's entire soundtrack seems to be based on that sometimes, so I get it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it would be definite knockdown if it meant it stifled innovation, but it clearly didn't.
Yeah, at least until Konami just gave up. But that's what we have Bloodstained for.
Exactly.
Which we are not going to talk about today. As much as I made the argument that Bloodstained is an actual Castlevania game in all but name, we've decided we're going to stick with the games with the actual Castlevania word in the title.
That way we can keep that episode under 3 hours.
Yes, fair. And on that subject, we should probably move on.
Then let's move on to beyond the NES era, from which these 2 previous tracks originated, and to Super Castlevania 4, which narratively is a Castlevania 1 remake. Some things just don't change.
Yup.
One of about a dozen remakes of the first Castlevania, because Konami was already showing signs of what they are all about even back then.
Oh yeah, but Super Castlevania 4 has a special place in my heart. I hate playing games multiple times, but this one is probably the only one I've cleared like 6-7 times or something.
Wow.
Yeah, there was a period of my life where every year I was like, sure, I'll finish Castlevania 4 today. And then I did and became good enough at it to not need any continue. No less.
Nice.
Yeah, thank you. Pretty proud achievement, if I do say so myself. And basically the game is separated between 2 sections. The outside of the castle, which has more ambient tracks, and the inner version of the castle, which has more referential tracks from previous game, more iconic ones. And the transition between those two is marked by a couple of levels. One which is complete silence, which is the outside court that leads to the drawbridge.
Right.
And then there is the entryway with all the dancers, and once you reach the upper floors, the swinging chandeliers. A wonderful demonstration of Mode 7. The swinging chandeliers were platforms that moved and hated you.
Yeah. Yeah, Mode 7 plus Super Nintendo physics equals want to strangle somebody.
Now, one of the interesting things about Mode 7 is that because it works by essentially making the background layer tilt around, what this meant is that the actual background, besides the chandeliers themselves, had to be more barren. I believe it's just black and red flashing lights, essentially. But that, plus the swinging sounds repeatedly, plus the music, created this very tense atmosphere that was just grandiose. Like, swinging on chandeliers is a classic swashbuckling trope as well.
Right.
And this kind of applies that with the more gothic horror theming of a Castlevania.
Which works because Castlevania is largely an adventure series.
Yes. And the hook is incredible again.
Yeah, no, honestly, with this song, like, I don't hate it, don't get me wrong, but this one doesn't hit me quite the same way. I like the OC remix version a lot. There's an OC remix version of this song that's very good. I will say this sounds very SNES. Like, I noticed very similar instrumentation to Breath of Fire 1. Like, that was the vibe it gave me pretty much immediately. This isn't my favorite Castlevania song. I like it, but I probably wouldn't give this one as much thought as someone who, you know, clearly is way more into that particular game than I am.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's not even my favorite in the game, but it's a very impactful one, and I believe my actual favorite one in the game. I have talked about it in a previous episode. Because how could we have lasted 35 Music Arcade episodes without talking about some of the best or favorite tracks from Castlevania games before?
I have a song on my list today, spoiler, that I'm pretty sure we have talked about before, judging by my search history. So, you know, that's just going to happen sometimes.
I had to hold back so much to not repeat myself, because I, as the resident goth here, have brought up Castlevania so many times before.
Congratulations on not putting Tragic Prince once again.
I'm honestly surprised we didn't get in there, but, you know.
I'm more surprised I didn't bring up Dance of Chaos, because that's my favorite.
Okay, that's a good one.
Yeah, as far as boss themes go, Iron Blue Intention ain't bad either.
That was a boss theme?
Or am I actually confusing it with...
The mental picture I have is outdoor platforming.
I think Iron Blue Intention was just a stage theme because they reused it in Portrait of Ruin as a stage theme.
It's a something... Well, if it's a stage theme in Portrait of Ruin, then at least I'm right that it's a stage theme somewhere, so maybe it is a boss theme too. I don't know. Iron Blue Intention's a cool song. That one's one of those songs that I put in the category of, like... Honestly, about half a Street Fighter 2 soundtrack. Like, it's not a theme that I think people know, like, off the top of their heads, but you start humming it and people are going to recognize it immediately, right? Am I wrong in that estimation?
You are not. Also, it began in Castlevania Bloodlines.
Yep.
And you even need a music level theme.
It's one of those tracks that you think they didn't stick in your mind, but then you hear the first few notes and everything comes to your brain. The entire melody comes playing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that stands out the most to me is in relation to the composer, because the previous track have been composed by what's a lot of internal Konami music team that I've looked a little bit in some of the individual composers, and save for one, which works these days on Grand Blue Fantasy, most of them have only worked on Konami titles. And of course,
I believe they were together. They were referred to as the Konami Kukeha Club or something like that.
And there is one particular standout that moved beyond that, which is, of course, Michiru Yamane, the name probably most solidly associated with the Castlevania soundtrack these days.
And I would argue rightfully so.
Bloodlines.
Yeah, I imagine most people think she entered the Castlevania franchise with Soden. At least I very much did until doing research for this episode.
Yeah.
And learned that she was on Bloodlines, which kind of makes sense because it's a much more ambience-heavy soundtrack than the previous ones, despite still being very action.
Iron Blue Intention does sound like her vibe. Maybe she wasn't the direct composer of this one. I don't know off the top of my head, but it definitely sounds like her influence is present here.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to lead to, that in spite of Michiru Yamane being more known for more atmospheric yet still dynamic style, this feels very much like an arcade style track. It draws you forward along a linear path.
You know, it's weird. You say she's known for atmospheric, but shocker of all shockers, this is my brain talking. The most iconic songs that I think of her have been very, very melodic.
I suppose I'll clarify my intention once we'll come a bit further in one of the tracks in the future.
Fair enough.
Yeah, we were talking Iron Blue Intention, and I decided to be the little imp that I often am.
Oh dear!
And I brought up an arrangement from a series of albums that Konami released in the 90s, and this one has a bit of a history to the guy behind it. The album was called Perfect Selection Dracula Battle 2, because yes, there's a one.
I'm sure.
Oh, yes, there is.
The two albums
I've listened to the one a lot.
Yeah, these two, just for context, Konami released a lot of arrangement albums in various styles. These two in particular are hard rock / heavy metal versions of Castlevania songs, and the guy arranging these tracks was Naoto Shibata, who metal fans might be aware of as the bassist for the band's Anthem.
Can you re-record that, please?
Just a sec, the bike's still here.
Yeah.
And the arranger for these two albums is a guy who is known as Naoto Shibata, who metal fans might be aware of as the bassist, or at least former bassist in one case, for the bands Anthem and Loudness, which are two of the biggest metal bands to come from Japan.
Sweet.
Okay.
Yeah, no, like the Castlevania music is a centerpiece for a reason, and again, the fact that Konami has released so many of those arranged albums, it may be self-referential in a lot of ways, but also they understood at the time the value of the game soundtrack, the value of pleasing the fans in these ways.
Which is...
Yeah, and I do appreciate this cover quite a bit, in great part because of that. Now that I've had to listen to it back to back, in the original back to back for the episode, I cannot tell which one I prefer, but I used to prefer this cover because I was a rebel teenager, I guess.
I gotta be honest, I do like this version, but I got vibe on the original. I don't think the melody line is as strong in this version.
Yeah, this version, I actually like it a lot. It feels... how to say it? Actually, no, I have the perfect comparison point. The original feels like... picture in your mind's eye the work cycle for Alucard, which is live with those trails trailing him.
Yeah.
Very quick on his foot. That's the original Iron Blue intention. And this one from the Dracula Battle 2 is much more of the Simon Belmont work cycle, which is very heavy, going and almost kicking the ground at every step. Very grounded and very fearful of stairs.
Very fearful of stairs indeed. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I can see why this song would be fearful of stairs. I get it.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. You know what?
We're gonna make it. We're gonna make that stairs joke a lot this episode, aren't we?
Probably.
Although they become a bit less relevant as the games evolve.
Yes.
Thankfully.
Once you start getting things like double jump and high jump and in one case turn the castle upside down. Wait, that one's not legal. Sorry for bringing it up. Stairs become less of a problem.
Yes.
You know what's always a problem? Clock towers. I don't know if clockwork has anything to do with clock towers, but it's clockwork.
It does. It was the clock tower theme from Castlevania 3 originally.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, and it's also the clock tower arena from Castlevania Judgment, which is this version.
Right, that's the version I'm more familiar with, because despite having not really played Judgment for very long, the soundtrack is good. Is really good.
Yes, it's good. I've played Judgment, actually, so I speak to it in experience. I've suffered through Judgment.
Oh, dear.
I have no interest in the game. I absolutely hate the character designs, but I love the soundtrack.
Good. Yeah, no, the character design was atrocious.
Dude, I just love to make fun of how Alucard's cape seems to have sofa stuffing on the inside.
Yes. Sofa stuffing? Wait, I can't unsee that now. Oh no, what have you done to my poor head? How dare you?
Trust me when I say that basically the music stands at the top for this game, then is the gameplay in second place, and then is the character design, and under the character design still is my opinions on the game scenario.
That bad, huh?
There is an entire... Maria's quest line is about breast envy.
I'm scowling very hard right now.
Oh, yeah. But the music is essentially the solidified, iconic versions of a lot of the track until Smash Bros. And the pachinko games came along. But with the addition, of course, of a certain pace, because it's a fighting game still.
Yup.
And that involves a certain adjusting for a certain length and for a certain playstyle and a certain intensity that the game itself doesn't always matches, but still. And why a lot of what this track, what this series provide is, like we said, gothic horror. This track stands out to me as peak Baroque musical aesthetics.
I mean, instrumentalization-wise, sure, but composition, it's more carnival music than anything else, from what I'm hearing.
Fair. I suppose by Baroque, what I mean is to express the general fanciness of it, the general interesting, making nothing simple.
Yeah.
Which suits the clock tower being this chaotic mess and tangle of cogs and spikes.
It wouldn't be a clock tower if it wasn't a chaotic mess of something.
Exactly.
Usually gears and harpies, but... Oh, and Medusa heads, let's not forget that.
Medusa heads,
yep.
Yes.
But,
The pain. The pain.
The first time I got into the clock tower in Sodom wasn't fun.
This is a very bouncy song.
That was the first game I ever got to. Fuck.
Yes.
I think the song is very bouncy. It's got an energy to it, but it doesn't really feel tense at all. It's very chipper. It's a chipper song.
Exactly. And being clockwork theme, you'd imagine something very regular throughout, and though it keeps its pace, of course, it only really pays attention to it during the intermissions and goes wild and crazy, almost mimicking somebody that is panicking and jumping and running for his life in between the few platforms of relative safety.
Yeah, this song isn't giving you the vibe for the stage. It's giving the vibe for what you are about to do in the stage.
Exactly. It's a wonderful integration of gameplay, and it goes to the point where in Judgment, the arena is actually 3 cogs that constantly move and sometimes can crush you or throw you into the void, because even in fighting games, gravity is still your enemy.
It's a Castlevania game. It wouldn't be a Castlevania game if gravity wasn't your enemy.
Exactly.
Galen was mentioning earlier how this composition of this track gives a bit of a carnival vibe. I'm inclined to agree. You are pretty much the clown in this carnival, I would say.
I mean, if you're playing Judgment, something is definitely funny about your life right now. Sorry.
I don't think we can pick that. Let's move on to the next track.
I mean, okay, fine. Well, I had a transition for it anyway, and I'm just going to do it anyway. I mean, I have no place to judge, anyone who enjoys Judgment, because I'm about to try to defend Castlevania 64. Wish me luck.
Hey, you're amidst friends here.
Castlevania, especially Legacy of Darkness, is actually, really underrated. Yes, it's got janky N64 physics, but so does GoldenEye. So I'm not really sure why that makes it so much worse.
I can't believe the Switch port is going to be the exclusive version with online play.
Wait, what? Hang on. No one told me about this. What?
GoldenEye will be re-released on many platforms, including, say, Xbox Game Pass.
Oh.
And it will also be part of the Switch N64 emulation, which will be a similar version, but also with online play.
Oh, wow, that's good. Anyway, sorry, that was a bit distracting. I'm going to be honest, I am a big fan of the franchise. However, Castlevania 64 was actually my first Castlevania game.
Oh. It's such an interesting entry. It's probably, from the ones I've played, the one with the best atmosphere.
It got atmosphere down, and it also doesn't mind being wacky.
Yes.
So it isn't taking itself too seriously like Lords of Shadow did.
Like any game with skeleton bikers would.
Right? Oh, yeah, the skeleton bikers and the Frankenstein with the chainsaw, and it's just got this vibe to it that's really hard to...
We were talking how Castlevania was pretty much the Universal horror movies.
Uh-huh.
This is Castlevania going to the Hammer horror movies.
Which is awesome.
Yeah. If I may briefly reignite trauma before we get back to the music.
Uh-oh.
Nitro Transport.
Oh. Okay, fair. That sequence was not my favorite. There were tricks to get around it, but, yikes.
Yes.
If that sequence is anyone's favorite, I don't want to meet that person.
Right?
Okay, if you don't know, it's a long sequence where you have to do, a third of the length of a level by carrying Nitro, which makes you relatively defenseless, and you have to platform amidst moving parts, narrow beams, and a lot of ways, and if you get hit or fall any single length, the Nitro you are transporting explodes in your face and you instantly die.
Right.
If I recall correctly, that also means you cannot jump in a platform action game.
Exactly.
Correct. However, to be clear, there are ways around this. There is a shortcut you can open and a mini-boss you can kill before you even get it. It's technically the long way around, but it's infinitely safer. Otherwise, you have to fight a mini-boss with the Nitro. Yikes.
That is bad.
That said, I also think the soundtrack, despite being entirely atmospheric, is actually, like, really underrated. And this song, which actually does play during the Nitro sequence, Castle Center, is exactly what it sounds like. It's the Castle Center. And it's got vibe. It's got vibe. I will defend this song. Really cool melody line. Really cool harmony line. Random act of a bridge that sounds not unlike Donkey Kong for some reason. Still not sure why that's there, but that sounds pretty cool.
Ooh.
I'm afraid of re-listening to the track now because I'm afraid I will never be able to unhear that.
Well, that's actually a good point. My point of comparison was actually the torture chamber from Super Castlevania 4.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, which has this drum line of
well, I was
with some heavier sounds, longer sounds as well.
I was thinking more the marimba section on the bridge. Yeah, that's like very Donkey Kong to me.
Yes. Definitely.
But I mean, it kind of goes to show that even the creators of Castlevania 64 really did have like a lot of faith in this song because it was used for the main credits theme as well. This was the end credits.
Yeah.
So
it's I think essentially well, the series in Japanese is named Akumajou Dracula.
Right.
And centers on the antagonist, while the Western version is named Castlevania and centers around the place. I'd say that Castlevania 64 and its soundtrack is the first that truly mainly centers around the place and gives it kind of a sort of reverence.
It does. And that's clear pretty much throughout. And
I'd say it's kind of a bit of both because I feel like it's these two games have a combined soundtrack, let's say, that's pretty good at sort of building a sense of anticipation for what you're about to face.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And these games, I might be misremembering a bit, but if I recall correctly, the plot of the games, Dracula is kind of always nearby.
Yeah.
You just don't realize it's
This
him.
actually has like one of the most developed versions of Dracula, one of the most developed villains in the game, and I think that also comes through on the soundtrack.
Yeah.
And also potentially one of the most anime versions of Dracula.
I mean, you're not wrong, but come on, who cares?
I know, but had to be said.
Okay, fair. No, I have a sneaky amount of love for Castlevania 64. I think it gets a bad rap from people who just want the series to be 2D, and I'm going to be getting back into that later, because, hey, guess what? I'm going to talk about more 3D stuff later, too. And I'm not going to...
What? I respect your Castlevania 64 love.
Yeah, I'm not going to try to say it's... Go on.
Yeah, no. If only because of the strength of its opening theme.
So
that violin, man.
Yeah. I'm not going to try to say that the Castlevania 64 games are better than a lot of the 2D games. I mean, Soten's kind of the gold standard for a reason. And then Castlevania 3, I believe, is the gold standard for the 2D platforming stage-based era. But, like, I think the amount of hate that gets piled on it is deeply unfair, and I kind of hope fans would give it another shot.
Yeah, like, they were still finding their footing, and I think they learned a lot from the more unfair and tricky parts of this game. And of course from the general knowledge of what a 3D platformer's control scheme would be.
Right, especially with a N64 controller, which is a travesty of a device.
Exactly.
And we're also talking about a time where, especially due to the graphical limitations of the Nintendo 64, pretty much every game had trouble finding an ambience, and when they did find an ambience for their games, it was usually kind of drab because they had to add that gray fog to obscure the fact that the 64 couldn't draw that many polygons. Meanwhile, Castlevania 64 has a lot of variety, a surprising amount of variety in its scenery.
It takes those limitations and rolls with it.
Yeah.
Like we said, atmosphere top notch.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think I'm done trying to kind of wave my flag for this game. I do recommend that if people like this song and like this soundtrack, give it a shot. Just try it with a fresh frame of mind and understand that it's
a lot of patience.
And a lot of patience. I understand this game is jank on jank. It is old. It is a 64 launch title. It is jank. Try to find...
Oh, you know what? If you try and you can't tolerate the control or anything like that, find an uncommented playthrough.
Yeah. Yeah. Try to see why I think it gets a bad rap. I hope y'all can discover some love for it like I have. Let's move on, I think.
Another thing that really sets up a mood.
Yes, Requiem. I failed to write down what game this was from in my notes and feel like a jerk now.
Circle of the Moon.
Thank you.
Yeah, we are talking about setting the ambience, and I mentioned the graphical limitations of Nintendo 64. Here's a song that it's very simple, but it kind of surprises me in how you don't feel the limitations of the hardware it was in,
right,
considering it has pretty lifelike vocal lines in a GBA title.
Right.
A rather early GBA title at that.
Yeah, I'm very impressed by these vocal pads.
Yeah, the actual song is pretty much just a repetition of a traditional, I believe it's Christian chant. If I recall correctly, the words Edie Alexsander means Lord have mercy, or something along those lines.
Yeah,
and it's just a repetition of those two words over and over, and pretty much the same melody all the time. But it sounds like an actual recording, and I could be tricked into believing it just played straight from a CD like that, or straight from Spotify for those young guns in the audience.
Yeah, musically, Circle of the Moon was plain impressive.
Yeah, it really did something with the GBA hardware that's very hard to do on a device that, you know, I don't want to say weak, but let's call a spade here. A device that unrefined.
Yeah, and it was so hard to pull off that the next game, Harmony of Dissonance, was more dissonance than harmony. And they had to downgrade the music a lot in order to make the graphics way better. And these two games are essentially what do we sacrifice? Sound quality or graphics quality? And then Area of Sorrow came and made everything better.
Yes.
But we'll come back to that.
Yes,
I think Harmony of Dissonance was the first and maybe the only game I've ever had to mute while playing.
Ouch.
But
well, that is about as hard an indictment on a Castlevania game as you can get.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Circle of the Moon was a game where I didn't enjoy the gameplay loop very much, but my god, the soundtrack.
I think we could definitely file it under underrated.
Yeah, I think most people kind of look down on it because as soon as Koji Igarashi came into it, he went, nope, not canon, the next one is gonna be canon. So people just go, okay, doesn't matter then.
Yeah, but
nice
canonicity,
game.
they fiddle with it in so many ways, and it got weird, and then they removed from canon, like, 3/4 of the game, and then they walked back and say, okay, we just remove this because we can't have the starter of the Belmont line be a female character from a Game Boy game. But that's besides the point.
They did weird things with the timeline.
They did Sonia Belmont dirty.
They did, but I'm just going to go ahead and say, and again, I'm bringing up something technically illegal, I'm glad Igarashi got his head out of his ass eventually, because now we have, if not Shinoa, then definitely Miriam.
Yes.
So, he's totally cool with that now. 20 years ago, not so much, but hey, people grow, people change, and I'm glad he did.
Although I believe a lot of the canon fiddling was around the time of Lament of Innocence, which we'll come back to very soon.
Yes.
This is an episode where we come back many times. We kind of walk in circles, but we'll get there.
Well, admittedly,
so does Castlevania.
I was literally saying exactly that. Yeah, Castlevania has its own circles, and not just moon-related ones. So,
exactly.
The fact that we're talking about things in that kind of same point kind of illustrates just how these soundtracks work. That they are very connected to both what's going on at the time and what happened before and what will come later.
It is the Castlevania way, we could say.
Can I transition?
Please.
Go on.
But these circular going around makes it seem like there's the games are interchangeable, and then there are some real strong landmarks. And I think if we have to point at one main turning point for the entire series and maybe the entire genre of platforming, that would not even be the switch to 3D like so many other series, but Symphony of the Night.
I mean, this is the all-time classic of the Castlevania series. It's the one that I think most lay people just think of when they think Castlevania, and for good reason. It's a damn good game.
Exactly.
I mean, not just Castlevania, like, we have the Metroidvania genre, and yes, Metroid created it, but Symphony of the Night was the codifier.
Yes.
It's the reason the genre has Vania in the name.
Exactly.
I mean, yes, I would agree with that, but I would say Super Metroid is just as influential, but that's now we're getting into game history that is probably not as relevant. And we talked earlier about setting the scene, and man, it is about as good of a scene set as you can get with Dracula's Castle, isn't it? Like, that just sells the premise.
We also talked about how there were more atmospheric tracks. This manages to kind of straddle the line between pretty much all non-boss music Castlevania themes. It reflects the atmosphere of the places around, with this castle theme that reflects the prestige of the place. It reflects also with its darker tones compared to the more heroic tracks of previous games. The differences in tone between the characters of the Belmonts and the Lacard of games before, and Alucard, which has very personal stakes in this. He comes with this castle with an iron will and determination, yet he is facing ultimately entities he is intimately familiar with.
Yep.
I would even argue that this track in particular, compared both to previous soundtracks and to the other songs in the same game, also shows a sense of sort of familiarity, because a lot of this soundtrack is either very gothic, so it's sort of representing, you know,
the castle,
the darkness of the place, or maybe the villainy of the bosses like Dance of Pails and Aurochs Quarters, or it's pretty action-packed for more action-heavy sections, like in the Clock Tower.
Yes.
Meanwhile, this song is more relaxed, though not to the point of being ambient.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it in contrast with those other tracks, Dracula's Castle kind of comes off with a bit of a homeliness, let's say, vibe, as far as you can get homely in a gothic setting.
Right.
Which I think reflects how Alucard is pretty much the only person in the world other than Dracula who would feel a sense of homeliness in Dracula's castle. To the point where Maria in the plot is complaining about the castle being chaotic and Alucard is completely nonchalant.
Yeah, and I think there's something to be said about the strength of this theme as a mix of locational and personal theme that, to mention Judgment again, this was the stage theme for Alucard.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and it has enough mastery and ambience to say it almost has this atmospheric-like relaxation and this rhythmicity, this energy, to be able to be slightly tweaked in order to fit a fighting game perfectly. This is less of a compromise and more of a perfect lightning in a bottle level middle.
And I think that really works in its favor, because it also kind of sells the feel of the game itself in a lot of ways, because it doesn't play like prior Castlevanias did. And I think the more relaxed feel actually really kind of helps, because if it goes as hard as some of the other ones, you'd be more, like, encouraged to rush, and I don't really think rush gameplay works for Symphony of the Night, and I think the soundtrack bears that out in a lot of ways.
Exactly, because there's a lot of place you're going to have to revisit.
Right.
I mean, to kind of bring back my point about the familiarity of the setting for Alucard, it eventually gets familiar for us as well, because we're constantly doing backtracking, so eventually the map feels familiar to us.
Yes.
Right.
Very much so.
Especially once it literally just gets turned upside down and becomes an excuse for the second half of the game.
I will say I never found the music in the Inverted Castle to be all that good. Like, I like it, but it's not what happened in the first half.
It's a
bit too repetitive.
A little bit, yeah. I would have liked to have heard a little more variation.
Yes.
But
to kind of draw the curtain briefly, we had most of the other tracks selected, and then when we looked at the selection, there's a lot of diversity, but we had to add this track last minute because it didn't make sense to have an episode without an iconic Symphony of the Night track such as this one, because it's such a turning point for the series.
Right, and if we were trying to challenge ourselves, like, hey, let's talk about Castlevania without talking about the big famous songs, that'd be one thing.
Yeah, that would work. But that's not what we were trying to do here.
No. So, it's good we added this one, and it's good we got a chance to talk about it, and it's good we got a chance to show off why it works, and why it matters, and why it's important. Which does bring me to another question, because the next one is called Hail to the Past. And I have no idea what game this is from, and the YouTube video is just moon runes. It's just in Japanese. I can't read this. What is this from?
I could tell you without remembering having heard this track specifically, simply from context clues. But I'm not the one that selected this track, so Eddie, the ground is yours.
Yeah, and I think I'll start with a slight correction, because it's Hail from the Past. And it's from Portrait of Ruin.
Aha. I never actually played Portrait of Ruin, so that makes sense.
Yes.
And that also explains why this song feels Egyptian, because Portrait of Ruin has a lot of portraits of completely unrelated places that you visit. And two of them, in fact, are inspired by ancient Egypt, and this is the theme to one of them.
Essentially, what this game did is that it starts you in Dracula's castle, and occasionally it says, how about you have a change of scenery and do a relatively linear level? Which tries to find an interesting middle point between all Castlevania and Metroidvanias. And, for this track specifically, in both versions, I really love the percussions that are cheaper, but also dragging you forward. And the choice of instrument adds an oniric tone to it on top of the whole Egyptian theme, which helps with setting up this illusory world inside of the painting.
Yeah, and people who are particularly familiar with my interests know that I love ancient Egypt stuff.
Right.
And this track, it's just instant earworm for me as soon as I listen to it again. I love the ambience it creates, and it does create an ambience while keeping a sense of energy that honestly fits really well with your character's walking cycle. Like you're walking to the beat of the song.
Nice.
Really cool.
Love it when it comes together like that.
Oh yeah, always. I again, having not played this game and having not heard this before really, it's got a really cool intro, and the use of marimbas of this song is actually like really good. Like this one's got some real like compositional vibe to it. I kind of wish I heard it in context.
Yeah, it basically feels going from the inside of the castle to this, like when you leave a place with the AC and you walk into the sun blasting down on you.
That's not wrong, but I live in a tropical country. I don't have very good experiences when that happens.
That's fair.
Well, at least it's not full of monsters.
Point. I'm sure Jonathan had a worse experience than I did.
And Charlotte.
It's a really cool way to show that you're going to a very different place.
Yeah, and it's a nice way with the portraits to be able to travel around the world without facing some kind of difficult themes and imagery, because that's the game that's happening during the Second World War, I believe.
That's... wow, okay.
Yeah. And they use this illusory world as a way to mix traveling around the world without having to actually travel around the world at war, and thus making some very difficult designs. It's actually pretty artfully navigated around.
I will say that I know it's kind of apples and oranges, but since we're talking about largely fun horror-based games, I do kind of respect the Shadow Hearts series a lot for kind of being like, yes, World War I is an actual thing that's happening.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
On the one hand, I understand that design standpoint. On the other hand, it's like, yeah, it's a Castlevania game. Probably not the format for it. So I get...
especially not on a Nintendo system.
Oh,
like
yeah,
DS.
no. Nintendo would... they probably would allow that, honestly. Like, let's just be honest here. But...
I think it was post Bayonetta, but not by much.
Man, years are hard.
Especially when talking about Castlevania games.
Yeah. Like, the release schedule is about as convoluted as the in-game timeline.
Yeah, no, time is confusing, so might as well get to the most recent Castlevania game. No, I'm not talking about Order of Ecclesia. That would be too optimistic. I am talking about the gacha game Grimoire of Souls that operated 1 year in, like, Canada and New Zealand before shutting down in the West.
It actually still exists in the West, but it's now an Apple Arcade exclusive. Which means you have to pay for the Apple Arcade thing, and I think you have to pay for the game extra on top of that.
No, I believe they tweaked and completely destroyed the intended game balance because it can't rely on whale to get to success anymore, which means the pacing is absurd. But the music,
it's an Apple exclusive.
Yeah, but the music is like, let's get Michiru Yamane to work her magic. And the result is a lot of good remixes and a few cool original pieces like this one, which has this very... it sets up the tone of the tale of the Belmont and Dracula's many resurrections throughout the ages.
It's the second time I'll say this on this episode, but I utterly love and absolutely hate that this song exists.
Yep.
For similar reasons to the Pachinko one.
You know, I really wanted to go back into our old show, Gathering of Gotchas, for a moment and, like, talk about what happened to this game, but I don't think that's going to be relevant.
And I haven't played it.
Neither have I, but I have an
I
Apple
definitely would have if we...
I have an Apple Arcade account thanks to my cousin. I've never used it, but I'm tempted to, just to see what this game is. I didn't realize they stripped out the gacha part.
Yeah, I believe they did. I'm not 100% sure, however. I have an Android phone.
Yeah, the Castlevania wiki says they did, so they probably did.
That is...
I imagine there must be some guidelines for being the Apple Arcade.
That is wild. I will have to check that out.
Yeah.
Anyway, where was I? Oh, right, the song. Cool intro theme.
Yeah.
Cool intro theme. Very haunting, very melancholy violin, big intro. It worked well. It's a good theme. Probably deserves a better game, but it's a good theme.
Yeah, exactly. It's... and it has two halves to it, with the first part being mostly mellow and kind of looking back fondly of heroes of the past or future in the case of Soma. And the second half is like, oh yeah, and remember there's this whole Castlevania thing, and sets up back the horror, brings it, and kind of shakes it around a little for your enjoyment. That sounds very pejorative, but it is made smooth as butter because Michiru Yamane can do no wrong.
She is really good.
It's kind of that vibe of, look at these characters. They're so interesting, and they're so innocent, and they are nice people protecting the world. What are they protecting us from? What was it that they were fighting? Oh yeah, vampire!
Yeah, exactly.
It's a great track. Like, it's one of those where in earlier episodes you guys would definitely have said that's a me track, because I am all over this one.
It does sound like a you track.
It's great.
Yes.
I just absolutely despise the fact that it's tied to a gacha game, and I also think it's not available on Spotify.
A former gacha game.
Yeah, the fact that it's a former
Still
gacha game
counts.
is the thing that's really kind of like got me in a loop.
It to me still counts because that means it's stuck on the Apple Arcade, and I'm not an Apple user.
I will just say this much. I've come to grips with the fact that gacha games have good music.
Yeah. Turns out there's a lot of them with a lot of good stuff.
Yeah.
And actually, that kind of reminds me of something I've heard that was a complete blind spot in my video game knowledge until recently, which was a live stream that showcased some plug-and-play right on TV games.
Oh.
And yeah, and there were cheap license games. The content and the gameplay was terrible, but a lot of them had actually amazing art and animations because they were 2D games. And during the early 3D era that these games were released in, a lot of excellent pixel artists and animators needed the work, and so did good work, which is how you have things like a Shrek plug-and-play game where Fiona does sick air combos into wall bounces that look amazing.
The sentence you just said is blowing my mind.
I know, it blew mine too. And my point here...
I should be surprised that Shrek came up in a Castlevania episode, but coming from you, I'm not.
I'll take that as a compliment gladly. And to return to my point, I think that gachas and mobile games can be an entry point for a lot of people, and given that the bigger one tends to reference themselves or famous license, it can also be a great way to play on that nostalgia, which is, as we've established, one of the things Castlevania had done for like 20 years. If anything, I'm surprised they didn't have a gacha game 5 years before this one.
They had that one Xbox Live game where you had to pay for chapters. Not a gacha, but still like heading in that direction.
Yes, the one with the HD initials that isn't Harmony of Dissonance.
Right.
Harmony of Despair.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
Yes.
That one also has some pretty cool remixes, like Judgment, just not to the same level.
Exactly the same vibe, but not to that point, because it doesn't have that fighting game baggage attached to it. Anyway, you know what gives me the will to fight? Heart of Fire is what gives me that will to fight.
That was a hard transition. Well done.
Thank you.
I hope you didn't pull a muscle there.
I didn't know how else I was gonna pull it off.
Sometimes you just need to take a swing and it works. The Sorrow games were great.
Yes.
The Sorrow games were great.
Yes.
I like the Sorrow games. All 3 of them. Yes, I'm going to keep bringing up Bloodstain just to spite people at this point. But let's be honest, Ritual of the Night, essentially Sorrow 3.
Yeah.
All 3 of them have really good soundtracks. And,
yes.
Yeah. This is a good song.
Like we said before that there was the GBA game with bad graphics and good soundtrack, and the one with good graphics and bad soundtrack.
Mm-hmm.
This one is both are great, and then some.
Mm-hmm.
And then the sequel went anime styles, but that's another matter entirely.
I didn't mind how
Heart
Dawn
of
looked.
Fire. Yeah, but it did look different.
It did.
And I picked Heart of Fire because it's, as far as I'm concerned, my favorite moment of the whole series, maybe. And it's not necessarily a series that is strong on moments, but that one definitely hit perfectly.
Yeah.
Because it's in the timeline one of the last game that was the last at the time of release, and then it got a sequel. But it's just something that the series has done for a long time already. The fated duel between Dracula and a Belmont. Except you're playing Dracula.
Yeah. That was probably one of the cooler ways of, like, kind of putting a spin on the series. Is like, alright, he's reincarnating. Which one is it? It's you.
Yeah. And you get the fancy hair, and will you go full bad guy or no? And that's exactly what Jay is trying to determine by fighting you. And so there's this perfect climactic big match feel of two people that want to beat each other until an inch of their life to see who is the more worthy.
And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this is also the first time in this game where you listen to a song from past Castlevanias. If I recall correctly, the other classic tracks that play in the game, like Vampire Killer, only play when you are playing as Julius Belmont.
Yeah, no, I believe that's the case. I believe so.
Also,
well, this one first released in Castlevania 2. I mean, Heart of Fire seems to have kind of fused with Don't Go Into the Night, I believe, something like that. And there's kind of an alternance between these two tracks, one of which debuted under this name on Castlevania, the arcade version of all things. And it may have happened a lot of time before, but as far as I'm concerned, and as far as the games that came after are concerned, Heart of Fire became, thanks to this fight, Julius Belmont's theme, which is a feat considering that he never had his own game.
Right.
Which I'm still mad about, Konami.
I actually learned a couple weeks ago that some Brazilian guys were trying to make a game about the reported 1999 battle where Julius is one of the playable characters.
Yeah, that's the dream game.
I don't think the original plan is coming along, so they're turning into a Castlevania 3 clone where Julius is one of 4 characters.
Julius so strong.
That's unfortunate. Fan games are hard. They're hard to navigate, hard to deal with, and hard to make.
And hard to keep online.
Boy howdy. I heard that.
But at least, even though we didn't have the climax of the Castlevania series as a whole with Julius's game, we had this moment. And that's why it's important, because it provides a sort of conclusion, and then after that, the inner struggle with a Dracula scene of chaos, that's icing. The fight against somebody that uses the Holy Cross and the whip, and the item crashes and dive kicks you in the face, is the biggest, like I said, this big match conclusion, and it sets my heart on fire.
Okay. Yeah, it's a wonderful climax point to, frankly, at that point, a real shot in the arm for the franchise, because I'm going to be honest, I kind of felt like Castlevania was in a bit of a slump before the Sorrow games happened. Like, it's been a while since they had a real big, like, oomph of a game, and,
yeah, because the 3D games were still a little bit dodgy in places. They were still finding the voice, and we've mentioned the issues of the 2 previous games that had to do a lot of sacrifices. And then Aria of Sorrow...
Harmony of Dissonance, in fact, felt like even Konami wasn't very confident in their own product, because it copies a lot of stuff from Symphony of the Night.
Yeah.
So it's trying desperately to recover that magic.
And then Aria does it confidently.
Which is good, because it needed it. And yeah, that is a...
Yes.
Even if it wasn't actually the end of the line, that was a pretty fitting end point for the franchise. If you're going to go out on top, it wasn't actually the end. Sorrow got a sequel, and then a reboot. But, you know... They did also try to do the beginning. Yeah, Sony still got done dirty, because Lament was a good game with a good soundtrack, but not as good as it should have been. Right?
No, curious about what you're gonna say about that once we take the longer pause.
Yes. Yeah, I will say that as transitions to 3D goes, I would make the serious argument that, the Lament of Innocence has aged more poorly than Castlevania 64, because while Castlevania 64 was a product of its time, Lament of Innocence kind of was just riding a trend.
I can see that.
Yeah.
Although I haven't played any of the PlayStation 3D Castlevania, which I suppose in itself is saying something.
Yeah. I would of the PlayStation ones, I would highly recommend Curse of Darkness over Lament of Innocence, but Lament of Innocence does have some pretty iconic themes, and Leon's theme, the now new first Belmont, ever since Sonia, right? She got herself retconned out of existence.
Yep.
So we end up with a pretty generic narrative with some unquestionably very good music.
Yes, that theme is... I believe Leon was a crusader, right?
I think so?
Yeah, because that has that feel of somebody that is fated to start a cycle of sorts.
If I recall correctly, he was either a crusader or a Templar who gave up their title to save his wife.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. And there's this very noble aspect to it.
Yeah.
Very dignified.
And I gotta be honest, like, this particular game in the fandom is pretty much regarded as meh. And while this song is quite good, it doesn't really have the juice behind it that even something as more widely reviled as Castlevania 64 even has. Because if nothing else, that one's still, like, notable, if for how quote-unquote bad it is. I still don't think it's that bad, but we've covered this already. But even then, imagine my surprise when I discovered today, in fact, or yesterday, I guess, there was a Smash remix of this exact song.
Yes.
Wow. Someone has faith in this game. Like, to be clear, I don't think Lament of Innocence is a bad game, but it isn't one I have any particular desire to return to.
To return very briefly to the Lament of Innocence version.
Yes.
I just wanted to say, and I feel I've said it about that piece before, and if it was this one, that means we've covered this track before, but that was a long time ago. I get Chopin's Etude Revolutionnaire vibe too.
Oh, that does sound familiar. Maybe we have covered this before.
I know, right?
I don't think I brought it up before. Eddie?
I did.
I think it might have been for a different track that I brought, but I don't think I brought this one.
Yeah, and if I would have picked a track from Lament of Innocence, it would have been Mordvia Aqueduct.
It would be really funny if our listeners discovered that
I hate to break it to you, but Mordvia Aqueduct is actually from Curse of Darkness.
Oh. Shows how much I played those games.
Right?
Yeah.
We're a well-informed bunch here.
Yeah. I'm going to talk about the Smash remix just real quick.
Yes.
It works. Like, I'm actually surprised at how good it is. Like, the original is still very good and sets the tone and really kind of stands for the character. But the Smash remix actually kind of does something really cool with it. It adds that, like, vocal line that really kind of works. It doesn't over-remix it, but still definitely sounds distinct. There's a lot going on here that I greatly appreciate.
It tweaks the pace more than change it, which, given the change of genres, you'd think you'd need to do more, but no, it really applies less is more in that space to leave themselves room to add those laments, pun intended.
Yeah, I think that's...
I could do without the guitar, though. I get that the Smash version needs more of an action vibe to it because it's a fighting game, but I do feel like it ends up losing a bit of the character in the transition.
I mean, I get that, but that also kind of makes sense because I don't believe Leon is at all playable in Smash.
He isn't. He's just Simon and Richter. And that also makes sense because it's a character theme, and it's not used that way in that game, so the tweaks are made in accordance to that.
Right.
Yeah, I perfectly get why they did it this way and how and whatnot. It's just personal preference. At the end of the day, I prefer the character of the original.
Yeah, and
that's
valid. I think what's cool about that present Smash is that it's a game that has nothing to do with the two featured characters, but it's a way to kind of present the musics of games that not necessarily many people have played, which is why I believe this arrangement is also much more conservative than, say, that Vega theme that was amazing, to take a Street Fighter example.
I think beyond that, it also serves a purpose that is kind of needed in a game that mashes a lot of franchises like Smash Bros, where it paints a picture of the franchise as a whole. Because you do have Simon's theme, and you do have, I think, beginnings for, or maybe Divine Bloodlines for Richter and so on. But then you have this theme, which is the theme of the patriarch of the Belmont clan. Like, it's painting a picture of the entire clan, and the history of the clan is the history of the franchise. So
yeah, exactly.
It has that purpose as well.
Yeah, that origin point.
Which I appreciate.
Even for beginning, it's also in.
This is also one of the most, like, piano-heavy of the main themes, for better or worse. I like that there's a lot of piano, but I like a lot of piano.
I do have a bit of a complaint about that, but we'll get more into it in the next track.
Okay. Well, why not just dive right into it then?
Alright. Because my complaint that's even more apparent with Anti-Soul Mysteries Lab is that the fact that it's chronologically the first game in the storyline does place it in, like, 1094.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of more modern sounds on that. Nothing more visible, of course, than the Super Mad Science Experiment room.
I mean, yes, but also at the same time, like, this is Castlevania. They've never worried about that sort of thing before. Again, Castlevania 64 featured a motorcycle with a sidecar and a minigun.
Yes, of course. But there's still a bit of a difference in tone between a mad science lab in the Middle Ages, where you've got bubbling cauldrons and strange devilish alchemy, and one where you have an almost aliens adjacent sound. And I think Anti-Soul's Mystery Lab crosses that line to me.
I dig this song. I think Eddie made a very good pick here. It reminds me in no small way of Anegawa from Samurai Warriors.
It is yet another track for our list of songs where I go, I don't like dance music, but here's a dance song that I enjoy. Because this is pretty much dance music.
It's enjoyable. I just don't like it in this game.
That's fair.
I think it works well. I understand where you come from, and I think there are other people that share the opinion.
Yeah,
I think it works pretty well in the context, especially if you actually play through the zone. Though you might think the zone itself is
probably.
I gotta be honest. I mean, that's just Lament's design scheme. All the zones are just basically straight up corridors with like 1 or 2 rooms that actually have some interesting features in them. So.
Yeah, and I think this area, if I recall correctly, was the one with the biggest room with interesting features, which had some moving platforms, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Either way, though, it is a pretty energetic song in a soundtrack that is mostly pretty ambience heavy, and I think it was on our last year's Halloween special, let's say, that I mentioned how there are cyber goths, and this is pretty cyber goth adjacent.
Yeah, it's cyber and it's goth.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
But honestly, as much as I'm not all too fond of the Mercury Steam reboot series, they still provided what felt like a more compelling starting point than Lament of Innocence did, from what I've seen of it.
Wait, hold on. What you just said blew my mind. Did you just say Mercury Steam?
Yeah?
As in the guys who saved Metroid?
Yeah?
How do they get the Metroid part so right and the Vania part so wrong?
And they got that wrong even in a 2D game. Because there were Mirror of Fate, I believe, which was a DS 2D game.
Huh. Wow. I guess they're just better at Metroid. I guess that's just where we're at.
Yeah, I guess so.
Because, like, I will defend Metroid Dread to my dying breath, but hearing that Mercury Steam, and you're right, now that triggered it in my head, they did do Lords of Shadow, and that's just very baffling to me, because I despise the Lords of Shadow games.
I wonder if the Lords of Shadow stuff is more trend chasing, because it was very much God of War.
It was very much God of War.
Or
it was
absolutely if it was more... Yeah, but what I'm wondering is whether the fault lies more there or more with Kojima being the head of this sub-franchise. And maybe there were too many yes men around him.
I don't think I can really blame Kojima for my opinion of the failures of that game. None of the things that made the game not work really felt like they were his earmarks.
Honestly, if the failures of those games meant they gave them the lessons to learn to make what Metroid Dread was, I'm almost okay with those sacrifices.
I mean, sure. No,
because I still need my 1999 game closure.
I do. That needs to happen at some point or another.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, there's a right way and a wrong way to do a 3D Castlevania, or a 3D exploration game of any kind. Honestly, Dark Souls is the one that finally perfected the 3D Metroidvania formula for all the wrong reasons, but it did.
100% agreed.
It got the map right and the gameplay wrong. I don't really love the Souls games, mostly because they feel just so slow! But,
yeah, they do, but as far as the navigation goes...
The navigation's on point.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Especially the first Dark Souls.
Oh, yeah. I would also make my usual argument for Bloodborne being the exception to the rule. That's just good.
Cool.
I guess my point is, like... The main reason I don't like Lords of Shadow is because, as it was said, it's basically just God of War. That's not how I want my Castlevanias to play. Like, I have a God of War game. It's better than the game that you guys made, so why would I play this when I could just play that some more? Right?
I have a God of War game. It's titled God of War.
Exactly.
I also have a Shadow of the Colossus game.
Yeah. So... Like, the fact that...
No amount of narration by Patrick Stewart can change that.
Right? I will say, yeah, Lords of Shadow, great cast. Patrick Stewart, Richard Madden, like, some really good people in that. Robert Carlyle, I think, was in that cast. Like, some good people. That does not make a video game. In fact, that's probably one of the things that Kojima added that made it work. Like, that was actually, like, a largely positive force.
I think the most damning thing that I can say about the game is that the closest game I can think of that it in itself didn't inspire that, so the closest thing that isn't Shadow of the Colossus of God of War that I can think of is Dante's Inferno from EA.
Which was also a ripoff of God of War, and Dante's Inferno was a terrible game.
Yeah.
That one goes on my, like, bottom games of all time list. I know I'm rare in that regard, but...
The fact I can draw a line between the two is telling. And the fact that the only track in this entire playlist we've selected, titled Lord of Shadow, is actually the one from the Pachinko game.
Oh.
Is saying something.
Here we go again.
Those tracks just didn't really mark my memory.
Yeah, it went from a franchise that, for better or worse, set trends to one that was chasing them was a bad sign for the reboot.
Yes.
To play devil's advocate a little here, I do think Lords of Shadow 2 has a bit of an underrated soundtrack. I have brought up one track from it before, and I do think the composer did a good job, at least in Lords of Shadow 2.
It is underrated perhaps, but it is understated for sure.
Yeah.
Like, I believe it's a suitable track for the game. My issue is that the bar is Castlevania level.
Right. We've just spent this whole time talking about the good music from Castlevania, even the underrated games, and then to turn around on this tangent on Lords of Shadow going like, I can't hum a single song from that soundtrack. I can't remember them. That's a terrifying sign. When even, like, the most obscure 3D Castlevania game, Curse of Darkness, has actually probably my favorite soundtrack of the entire franchise? Of a franchise this stacked? What the hell?
That much, huh?
Oh, man. Like, so...
I will say that, from what I can tell from what I've listened, to set up a baseline, I think it does a better job than Symphony of the Night, by being more focused on it, of presenting and representing the castle itself.
Oh, yeah. The opening stage to Curse of Darkness is called Abandoned Castle, and according to my search history, I've talked about this before. But, I will die on this particular hill. That song needs to be alongside Vampire Killer, Bloody Tears, and even Iron Blue Intention is some of the best this franchise has to offer. I need people to recognize this song.
It's hard to tell if you've talked about it before, because the music, the moment you hear it, feels like you've heard it before.
Yeah. It is definitely...
It has this familiar feeling to it.
Yeah, it's definitely a take on what's come before, but it's got an energy to it unlike anything else this franchise in 2D or 3D has brought to the table. It does show off a more action-oriented Castlevania, but that still has the exploration part to it, so it hasn't really abandoned that. You know, I know that we're talking about level design isn't really helpful, but the level design is a lot better than it was in Lament of Innocence, despite being the direct follow-up to Lament of Innocence.
Honestly, that alone makes me glad that the Castlevania animated series make Hector and Isaac shine through.
Oh, I didn't even know they were in that. They actually acknowledged Hector and Isaac? That's awesome.
They do more than that. They are an integral part of some of the seasons. And yeah, they have done a great job making them incredibly compelling.
Yeah, that's awesome. You've just given me one more reason to check out the Castlevania show.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I mean, I gotta be honest, the whole soundtrack is like this. Like, it's just banger after banger.
Yeah, did you know Malvia Aqueduct is from this game and not Lament of Innocence?
Yeah, it's the third or fourth level. I forget.
Wow.
I say third or fourth level as in it's linear, but the opening kind of is. Like, you get back to the exploration as you go on, but the first, like, few areas are pretty, like, in a row.
Yeah.
Yeah, an abandoned castle just sets, again, we keep talking about this, it just sets the tone. It sets the tone for the game. It goes hard, it has a sense of wonderment to it, it does show the danger, and it just plain sounds great.
Exactly.
That keyboard breakdown on the...
yeah.
You first.
No, go ahead.
That keyboard breakdown on the bridge has got to be one of my favorite moments of any... It's up there with, like, the denouement of the of Tragic Prince from Symphony.
Yeah, like, I don't know if any part of that track goes harder than some of the staples to me, but what makes it stand out is how it's faultless. It's like that thing that just, yeah, it doesn't really have any criticism I can think of at all.
Contrary to Galen, I'm more inclined towards the Lament of Innocence soundtrack in general.
Okay.
But as far as a single track, single song, I do think this one is pretty good, and it's on par with the best tracks in the franchise, definitely. I usually, while playing through Curse of Darkness, I usually had issues with like the synths. I thought they didn't mesh too well with the rest of the song.
I've heard that complaint before.
But here it's perfect. I think it's very well composed in this particular case, and each instrument serves a purpose and does it well.
Yeah, you're not the first person to say that sometimes there felt like an instrument mismatch. I don't necessarily agree, but I have heard the argument, like the second zone, Balljet Mountains.
Yeah, I think that was the one where I had the most.
Yeah,
sort of
people kind of complained about the
effect.
harpsichord on that one, because it's a harpsichord for an outdoor area. Yeah, so I think the harpsichord plays, but I have heard this argument before, and I do acknowledge it is valid. It is certainly a compositional choice that is controversial, and extending that to other paths does make sense.
Yeah, because that's going to lead me a little towards a general conclusion. One of the things that stands out is how much the themes for these games, on top of referencing each other, looking at the past and looking at what's around, are the themes of the characters as much as they are the themes of the scenery around them, which is why, in more modern installments, the fact that there's even new compositions that are good by themselves, like that Grimoire of Souls opening, it still doesn't hit the same way, because even if you have the characters you can look back on, even if you have some new gameplay, you don't really have the new castle to explore, the new mysteries of the wilds that are so good to get through in a Castlevania game. You are here to whip Dracula in the face, but the gameplay isn't just that moment. It's all of the lead up from the forest far away, where the castle is just a little part of the horizon, all the ways to the very chamber on top of that flight of stairs. That is where the fun is. And
I'm
where
have
the
to hold
music
back
is.
so much to not title this episode Whip It Good.
You should. Why wouldn't you? Come on.
Fair. I want to make a final point about the soundtrack to Castlevania as well, before we go further into the now playing segment. It's something I hadn't thought too much about, but came through to me as we were researching and finding tracks to discuss on this episode.
Mm-hmm.
But there's an interesting through line, let's say, in the soundtracks to Castlevania, where at first I'd say the NES and most of the Super NES tracks sort of have more of a hard rock vibe to them. Of course, they're not using actual instruments, and even the sounds they're using aren't really guitar sounds, or not usually used as guitar sounds in games of those eras. But there's a sort of hard rock energy to them, to the compositions. And as Bloodlines came, we started getting more ambience heavy stuff, which sort of shone through with the Nintendo 64 games.
Yeah, but to
eventually
briefly interrupt, what's impressive about that is that while there is this shift indeed, it still felt like a continuity and an evolution rather than a break.
Yes, and eventually they sort of matched the two halves, let's say.
Yes.
Because we have games like Lament of Innocence, which has a melancholic theme to the main character who lost the love of his life, alongside a cyber-gothic track, for the lack of a better term.
Yeah, and like games like Portrait of Ruin and Order of Ecclesia, perfect examples.
It's an interesting example of a franchise where the franchise has lasted many, many years, but the soundtrack has evolved. Often with long franchises, we end up falling into a situation where the soundtrack kind of falls into a similar vibe no matter what game of the franchise you're playing. I think Mega Man is a good example. Like, every Mega Man soundtrack is great, at least the ones we talked about in the past, but you know what you're getting into, no matter what title you're playing. With Castlevania, it varies quite a bunch, but it still feels like Castlevania.
I will object on the fact that Mega Man X changed a thing and then became its own very similar thing.
Yes, I think the thing with Mega Man is that each sub-franchise has its own identity.
Like, there's clearly defined branches, whereas Castlevania is more spreading harmoniously.
Yeah, it's with Mega Man, if you get into a specific sub-franchise, you know what that sub-franchise will sound like. With Castlevania, you're in for adventure, and hey, the game's about adventure, so have an unexpected denouement for you there.
For a moment, I thought you were going to say, "How about you?"
We already did that joke.
That works too. And here's hoping we get more games that aren't just locked to the Apple Arcade.
Yeah,
they're called Bloodstained.
Yeah. And
I just wanted more of Alucard.
And with Konami even doing things with Suikoden of all things,
that blew my mind.
Yeah, it's more of a time to be hopeful, but at the same time, it almost feels like a provocation a little that the one thing they're showing as an example of how the Suikoden 2 remakes is going to look and sound like is the party's battle against an evil vampire in his castle.
That seems oddly fitting for Konami.
Yes. But that's not a game we are playing now.
Nope, let's talk about those, however. Music Arcade, now playing. Okay, who's going first this week?
Well, I can get it done pretty quickly. I played Slime Rancher 2, game's cool, music's unremarkable, and there was the update to Genshin Impact. Now it's a slightly tweaked instrumentation from the rainforest to the desert. It's alright, but nothing really remarkable, and the rest is either too long ago for me to remember, or just isn't really worth mentioning musically.
Fair enough. So I've had 3 games. We have Arknights as usual, the Guide Ahead event. called Guiding Ahead originally in China, but apparently it's now Guide Ahead here in global.
Weird localization, but okay.
This has been no small amount of consternation on the subreddit. Like, people have been raging about this, and I'm just like, I don't care. The music's pretty cool, though. Church dubstep is not a combination that should work, and yet somehow this song exists and is great. This boss theme is a really good boss theme.
Yeah, bring church dubstep to Castlevania, you cowards.
No? I kind of think, like, no. Let's go with no on that one. I think let's leave that in Arkanites where that sort of thing can actually function. On the subject of dubstep, the other one I played was Judgment. The Yakuza spin-off that is now on Steam, that when I started playing it, it wasn't. So that was a big shock to my system. I might play the sequel on Steam. I played this one on PlayStation, and damn, this game was good.
Yeah, it looks great. I can't wait to get my hands on it.
I feel like you will enjoy it. I don't want to spoil too much, but there's a couple of themes that stood out to me, both of which are boss fights. First is a boss fight against a guy named Cane Man. And Cane Man doesn't have an actual name. His good twin does. I'm not convinced the good twin is actually a twin. I think that's just Cane Man.
No.
And I will tell you why. I have nicknamed Ryo Sasaki, the good Cane Man, as Majima Jr. Because between the two of them, they use every aspect of Majima's Slugger moveset from Yakuza 0 except the baseball bat. So all of his Weapon Master stuff that I put an inordinate amount of time into developing, yeah, they use all of that. Up to and including...
Interesting.
Up to and including his legend/knife style.
No.
Yeah.
Because that's very distinct.
That is very distinct, but when you have Ryo, a.k.a. Cane Man's good twin, a.k.a. probably Cane Man, as an ally in random fights around town, he busts out the Majima.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's interesting about this track, I believe it's the one that's just titled Lambda.
Is that a lambda? I thought that was a delta.
No, a delta you have the three lines.
Okay.
Capital Lambda is 2.
I will just call it a triangle. Sure, yes, lambda. Let's go for it.
Okay. Yeah, and what's interesting to me and striking right from the start is how at least the hook sounds a lot like the Isizaki Ichicho main battle theme from Yakuza Like a Dragon.
Oh, okay.
The one in Yokohama.
Okay, yes, that is very interesting.
Yeah. Like, one is way drier, but there's a link there.
There is a link there. So that brings me to my...
Which is ironic, because it's the sequel that happens in the same place.
Huh. My understanding is this character does return to the sequel, so it wouldn't surprise me if that was quasi-pseudo. Probably not intentional at all, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, because I don't think the timing works at all. But that brings me to my headcanon. I nicknamed this guy Majima Jr., but the more I learn about him, the more I think he might actually be Majima's kid. Like, did he ever hook up with Yukie? Or anyone in the Yakuza 0 timeline? Because the age is right.
I don't think he did.
I don't think so either, but he ages right. He has that, like, quasi-split personality thing where one second he's just a drunk putz, and the other time he's and the other half of the time he's this, like, incredibly capable and dangerous assassin. And there's more than enough clues that they are, in fact, the same person. And yeah, again, he just uses all of Majima's moveset, including one that is extremely distinctly Majima.
One of the main things that wouldn't work in that timeline is that, I will not provide context for that, but it doesn't really make sense that Majima is alone.
Okay. Fair enough. I'm like, this guy has a lot of the same earmarks, including acting like a complete loon when he wants to. So...
Oh, like to talk in wrestling terms, he joined the tag team division at some point.
Okay.
That went over my head, but okay.
I'm sure I will learn.
Good.
As
That's made to not spoil anything too clearly.
Okay, fair enough. Cool.
And like I've actually, a little aside, I've actually seen a picture that kind of reignited my desire to do all of the mainline Yakuza game, which is a picture simple from Yakuza 5, which just show our beloved Kamurocho, but it's winter and there's snow everywhere.
Oh, cool. Merry Christmas, question mark?
Probably.
Anyway, the other song that I wanted to bring up about that, now that we're not talking about Cane Man, there was another... I didn't actually want to post Cane Man's boss music just yet. That wasn't really my first choice. My first choice was... I guess I could describe it as the final dungeon battle theme, but I couldn't find that in the soundtrack quickly enough for this episode. Instead, I gave us the final boss theme. So, I'm not going to spoil who the final boss is. I will say
of course.
Yep. I will say that it was an awesome fight.
Nice.
Like, damn, that was a fun fight. And
them learning to actually do boss fights is pretty good.
Yeah. I will say, okay, going back to comparing again, there is someone you fight 4 times, like Daisuke Kuze in Yakuza 0, but it feels a lot more naturalistic and not as obnoxious.
Nice.
What's interesting is that his, like, hardest boss fight is actually his 3rd fight. That's the one that's the actual, like, fight with this guy.
Oh.
Anyway, the final boss, the game doesn't hit you over the head with him being the final boss, but it makes perfect sense that it's the culmination of the story and works absolutely perfectly. And the music is kind of a letdown. Gotta be honest. It doesn't feel as big as a fight like this should be. It's good.
Yeah, like, it feels important,
right,
but it doesn't feel like a big fight.
Right, and it is the big fight. It is the thing the whole game's been leading up to in a variety of ways.
It's no Heart of Fire.
No, it's no Heart of Fire. I do like the song. I don't love it. I kind of wish there was something that went as hard as Lambda.
Yeah, no, it's pretty fine.
It's fine. But that is probably my biggest complaint about the music in this game is the final boss theme probably should go harder for how tense the situation is.
At least, from my point of view, it makes for some great background music to write to.
Oh yeah, that's pretty true of the Yakuza series as a whole. If you're into, like, hard EDM, that's the way to go.
Yes. Lots of good tracks to pick from.
Yep, and finally I'm still playing FF14, and I'm still grinding out my weapon by beating up E8. E8? P8. Excuse me. P8 once a week. This song is good. It works. It isn't getting on my nerves 7 weeks later, 5 weeks later, 6 weeks later. I don't know how many weeks it's been. It's been a while.
Yeah.
So, you know, good for them. Good song. Good song. P8.
Yeah, turns out having 3 musics throughout the tier helps a lot with fatigue. Especially when the last one is comprised of multiple musics.
Mm-hmm.
Now then, Eddie, what did you play, and why is it Destiny 2?
Yeah, so my list of things I've played since the last time I've been here is obviously a bit bigger considering the time. But for the most part, I've just been playing Destiny 2 lately. As of the time of this recording, about a month ago, they released a new season, and with that came a free week where you could access every expansion. And I was a bit behind. Last time I played was 2020, so I had 2 entire expansions to catch up on, and I enjoyed it and bought them, and I have been playing a lot, maybe a bit too much, because I just enjoyed the gunplay a lot. It is the same guys who made Halo after all, so the gunplay is bound to be great. And coincidentally enough, the new world that you can explore in this expansion gives me some Castlevania vibes, because it's the personal world created by the titular Witch Queen of the expansion. And it's a huge sort of marble white structure that reminds me a lot of the castle entrance in Order of Ecclesia. So I found that pretty interesting. As for the soundtrack, I remember in the past episode I brought up how, contrary to most Destiny players, I felt the soundtrack to the Destiny 2 was a bit meh, with the exception of one song. This expansion does something that I enjoy quite a bunch, and I don't often see, at least not in Western games. We all know that I don't play that many Japanese games, so maybe in Japan they do it more often, which is, number one, to use leitmotifs. There is one strong leitmotif that is used throughout the game. And
no leitmotifs in any MMORPG we ever played.
Sorry.
Yeah. Had to do it.
Fair.
Yeah, sure. The other thing, which the leitmotif actually brings me to it, is something that, again, I don't see in too many games, which is they integrate the lore into the soundtrack. To explain that, I need a little bit of time, but basically in the game's lore, the villain of this expansion, the titular Witch Queen, has created a sort of magical song that is made to be stuck in people's minds, and supposedly she has some semblance of control over those people through her song, over those people who have heard it. No one knows how much control, no one knows if it's just maybe she can see the world through them, but we know there's something. And
so that makes the vocals we hear occasionally almost diegetic.
Yes, the world is also a representation of this Witch Queen's mind. That's how these special worlds work. In Destiny, you are always either exploring an actual planet that exists in the real world, or you're exploring one of these, the game calls them drone worlds, which are places that are created through magic, and they are at the same time a place and also a physical representation of the mind of the person who created it. So you are pretty much literally surrounded by the Witch Queen. So there's this melody. They first introduced the melody on the previous expansion in one of the seasons. Actually, it was in 2020, but we didn't know what it was back then. And it goes something like...
I'm so proud of you right now. I'm so proud of you.
Yeah, thanks. But anyway, it's something like that, often with slight variations, and that's pretty much become the leitmotif for the Witch Queen.
That's cool.
And games, just to be clear, games do a lot of reusing songs, entire songs, whenever a specific character appears. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like John Williams style leitmotif, where you can hear bits of the Imperial March whenever Anakin does something evil in the prequels.
Yes.
So you don't hear the same track all the time, but you hear those 8 notes a lot, because everything you're doing is under the influence of this Witch Queen without you knowing, because she's a schemer. And I love that. I love when games do that. Both the use of a leitmotif and integrating the lore into the music. And I've been having a lot of fun going through that, listening to that, and now that I learned about the lore of this song, as the lore calls it, cannot unhear it every time it shows up. Which it's fitting since that's its objective in the lore, so yeah, I've been having a lot of fun with both the gameplay, found a cool clan with hundreds of people, so been doing some group content for the first time in an MMO since 2018, and been having a lot of fun with the soundtrack too.
All right.
Right on. And that is all we have time for today. It's been a long episode, but hey, lots to talk about. Reminder, you can always get in touch with us by checking the links in the description below and over at the Discord.
Can you stop hitting me in the head out with that cross?
Never!
And I guess we'll see you next time. Have a good one, everybody.